Lupica the Underdogs. Hey guys, Top Productions here. Mike Lupica the Underdogs, Chapter 6. Going to begin. Okay, Chapter 6 is kind of a long chapter, just to let you know. They played all afternoon. They finished the game and switched the teams around and then started another game, 5-on-5. Bobby Carrington, the team's quarterback, last season hadn't shown up, so everyone took turns playing quarterback. Now was the last game of the day since it was getting close to dinner time. Only the game wouldn't end, so they finally came up with a variation of the overtime format used in college football. One team got the ball in midfield, and if they scored, the other team had to score for them to keep playing. If the first team didn't score, the other team could win with a touchdown. After 2 rounds of overtime, no more first downs, scoring in 4 plays or turn over the ball, both teams kept scoring away anyway. And even though it was just a touch football game with a bunch of buds, even though most guys were dragging at the end, even though they had dinner waiting for them, here was the thing: nobody would settle for a tie. Chris Alo, the biggest guy on the field, said, "I'd rather lose than tie." "Same," Tim said. They were in their huddle. Will shook his head, grinning at them. "You know today's result doesn't count in the standings, right? It's not going to affect our playoff position." Chris said, Are we keeping score today?" "Well, obviously," Will said. "Then it counts. Now call a play so we can end this. I'm hungry." Tim said, "Why aren't you?" They finally stopped Jeremiah's team in what felt like the 9th overtime, but only because Jeremiah had dropped a wide-open pass in the end zone, not because anybody on defense had any legs left. So if Will's team scored, the game would be over. Will said he'd play QB. He gave them all their pass patterns, then took the snap from Chris. Jeremiah, totally gassed now, he was left to rush the passer. He loudly counted out until he got to 5 Mississippi, and then came after Will. Will gave one last look down the field and smiled to himself. Then he took off past Jeremiah. As soon as he did, he heard somebody from the defense yell out, "He's running." Will ran, taking it up the middle of the field at first. He sent Chris and Tim deep and now saw the guys who'd been covering them, Wes Baby and Brandon Spikes, running toward him from both sidelines. They did have the angle on him and probably thought they could keep him in the middle of the field where they could converge on him. But when they had almost reached him, Will put on one of his best moves on him. He wasn't quite at full speed, not yet, so he was able to plant a foot and spin, turning his back on Wes and Brandon, giving them what was called his 180. And just like that, he was giving on his way to the right sideline, leaving them in the dust. Will heard one of them say, "Get out of here." "That's exactly what I'm doing," Will thought, running down the sideline. He gave them one last look behind, over his left shoulder, legs pumping, hearing his own breath, and saw that Jeremiah was still chasing the play. He might as well have been chasing a car. Will switched into the extra gear just for the fun of it. He ran straight through the end zone, not doing anything fancy with the ball, no dopey dance steps, no showboating. It wasn't his style. Act like you've been there before. He just put the ball down in the end zone grass. Game over at last. Tim got to him first. "You were gonna run it even if we weren't covered, weren't you?" "Pretty much." "You're a dog." Will laughed now. "Pretty much," he said. "You need a real game, dog," Tim said. "We all do." Will went back, picked up his ball, staring at it for a second in his hands like he might have some kind of answer for him. "Tell me about it," he said. It was close to 6 by then, and the other guys were rushing home to dinner. Will was in no rush. His dinner would be there for him, he knew. His dad always made sure of that. Will didn't know what was on the menu, just that the food would be either in the refrigerator or on the counter waiting for him to heat it up when he got home. His dad was already on his way to Newton by now, where he was taking class at the community college. Joe Tyler called it a way of getting away from Forbes, even if it was only through the books. So there was no schedule for Will, no set time for him to have his second meal of the day by himself. He walked up to Ark Street instead, walked by 10 blocks to Forbes High School, wondering if they'd already passed Hannah Grayson's house along the way. Wishing she had been spying on him today at the end of the game, wishing she'd seen him take it to the house instead of getting brought down by a hole in the ground, wondering why he cared what that annoying girl he'd just met thought of him. He stood on the sidewalk in front of the high school when he got there, looking at the old brick buildings, almost feeling as if he were looking at a picture in some history book. The whole place looked as old and tired to Will as the rest of Forbes did. Then, ball under his arm, Will walked around the back of the football field, the one field in town that was still in decent shape. The wooden scoreboard stared down at from one end zone. Wooden bleachers rested on empty both sides of the field. A huge sign stood at the opposite end of the field from the scoreboard. Home of the Forbes Falcons, the sign read. Underneath, in fading paint, was a smaller sign, an advertisement that read, proudly sponsored by Forbes Flyers, the shoe for fleet feet. Except that one of the F's was gone, so now it read Forbes Liars. My dream house, Will said aloud. No matter how much he fantasized about where his speed, his talent for football might take him, he knew the path would go through this field. At this school, in this town, on one side of the river. He took one last look around, one last good look at his football future, and then began a long walk home. Cheeseburger tonight. Cheeseburger and fries and corn on the cob. A well-balanced meal for a growing boy, his dad said in a note on the fridge. The note also told him that there was an apple pie for dessert purchased this afternoon at the country cupboard. Will heated up the food, ate it in front of the television set in the living room, watching the end of the 6 o'clock sports center. He cleaned up when he was done, ate 2 pieces of pie with vanilla ice cream, went upstairs and fired up his laptop so he could check his email again. There was some junk mail that had gotten through and messages from Tim asking Will to call him later about their upcoming fantasy draft. That was it. Not what he was looking for. No miracles tonight. So he sat there for a while online, checking out some of the NFL stat pages, getting ready for the upcoming fantasy draft. The kids his age in the West River League had decided they might as well have a fantasy league too, and Will had won it easily the year before. The year he had decided to partner up with Tim, mostly because Tim had begged him. You do the work, I'll share the glory, Tim had said, but what's in it for me? That's a very selfish attitude if you ask me. I didn't, Will had said. Last year, fantasy football had just been pure fun. It seemed more important now, though, if only because the year might be the only way Will would get to compete with the other kids in the West River League. Fantasy football was just one more version of a game that had already come naturally to Will. He knew the stats he needed for selecting a quarterback or running back or wide receiver were already inside his own head, that he didn't need to look them up online. He knew them by heart, like football was his heart. Which was why, for the first time ever, despite how his dad and the rest of Forbes had begun struggling for years, Will understood what it was like to be poor. He knew a lot of people were a lot worse off than he was, and Will had never been one to feel sorry for himself. He and his dad had it much better than some people, most people who lost their jobs when the sneaker factory closed, people who even now were still looking for their steady work. Will had lost his mom and then a first home which he barely remembered, but he always had the football, as though the game was the one constant in his life. Maybe that was why the idea of losing the upcoming season made him feel so lost. He thought about going back downstairs, seeing if there was anything good on television tonight. He didn't really feel like calling Tim, not wanting to talk to anybody in the mood he was in, so he decided to watch one of his favorite movies, The Express. The one about an old Syracuse University football player named Ernie Davis. As much as Will knew about football history, he didn't know much about Ernie Davis at first, just that he was one of the names on the long list of guys who had won the Heisman Trophy, and that he'd been the first African American to win the award. He came from Elmira, New York, just over the Pennsylvania border, and he'd grown up poor, so when Will watched the movie, he learned that Ernie Davis died in the end, died before playing in a professional game. It had just about killed him. He'd rewatched The Express many times since, but he'd always shut it off after the Syracuse beat Texas and won the Cotton Bowl and the national championship. Will liked his own ending to the movie better, the happy ending. He wished his life could work out that way too. He watched the movie tonight and got in the Cotton Bowl, the part with all the dirty play from the other team, the nasty comments made because Ernie Davis was black, the attempts by the Texas player to hurt him every chance they got. But he kept getting back up until his team won the game and finished off its undefeated season. The end, Will thought, the happy end, as he shut off the movie, hearing his dad's car in the driveway at almost the exact same moment. He heard the car door slam, went over to the window, and looked down at saw his dad limping across their small front lawn to the front door, not looking up, not knowing how he was being watched from the upstairs window. Will knew his dad always limped more when he thought nobody was watching. His dad probably wanted a way different story for his own life. Maybe he wished there was a way to pause his own movie right before those two guys destroyed his knee. Will stood there wondering if his dad even remembered what it was like to run down the field the way Will had today, as if nothing and nobody was ever going to stop him. Wondered if his dad even allowed himself to remember the good parts of his own career, or if it hurt too much to remember the way his knee did. He went to the top of the stairs now to say hi to Joe Tyler. "What's good?" his dad said when he looked up and saw Will there smiling at him, moving to the foot of the stairs with no limp at all, opening his arms for Will to come down and give him a hug. Will raced down the stairs and did just that. "You're good," Will said, hugging him hard. And that's the end of chapter 6. See ya!